Before we get started, my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghost of Nothing, is now an audiobook. Be sure to check it out. There are fairies on the farm. This happened in New York in the 90s. I was on the train headed home after work when a mid-20s, very handsome man sat next to me and started talking. I was young and attractive, but usually this sort of thing didn't happen to me. He was very confident and came right over, sat down, and started talking. I don't remember exactly what he spoke about, but I just remember being slightly unnerved by the things he was saying. Finally, as we were coming to my stop, he asked me how I could be sure that I was really alive. This I remember clearly. He said it in a way that was jolting. He looked me dead in the eye, and when he blinked, his pupils blinked vertically. I got up and got off the train, unsure of what had just happened. I never saw him again. I never thought it was a fairy until my daughter, who reads folklore, thought it might have been one after hearing the story. I never believed in fairies myself, but my daughter believes in them and explained to me that fairies are different than and do not really understand humans. She asked me if it was a solstice when the incident happened, but it was a long time ago and I cannot recall if it was or not. At the time, honestly, I thought it was an alien or something, or my mind playing tricks on me. But maybe my daughter's right. Maybe it was a fairy using glamour or something like that. I don't know much about traditional fairy beliefs, and I'm unsure about what fairies are. I can't say for sure that this guy was some kind of supernatural being. All I can say is that this person didn't seem like a normal human being to me. Something wasn't right about him. Just wasn't right. When I was a kid in the 60s, my family lived in an old house in Virginia. Before we moved in, the house had belonged to a botanist, and he had installed many rare and unusual specimens in the garden that frequently grew out of season. The back garden was a treasure trove of flowers, and where the back garden appeared to end at a river stone wall that jutted past both sides of the garage, there were actually hidden stone stairs that led to a private upper walled garden that was wilder and quieter than its counterpart, and on a steeper hill that should have been possible. I had been playing one evening in this upper walled garden when I had my experience. It was around twilight when the evening grew suddenly silent. Then clouds of lights like fireflies rose from the ground, but the lights seemed more diffused and hovered into a bright cloud. This cloud grew to doorway size, and people began to walk through it. They were male and female, taller than the adults I knew, and so beautiful that I ached to see them. They wore strange robes and were on foot. Somehow they seemed familiar, and I moved closer to see them better. They were moving forward with a purpose that did not involve me. They hadn't noticed me there. There was a large party of them, but they were very quiet. Only a dry leaf rustling sound accompanied their movements. But soon, a group of short, Stout beings with skin like tanned leather appeared. They had hair that looked more like dark animal fur than human hair, and they lurched forward on longer animal like arms. I had felt no sense of fear or danger until I saw these shorter creatures, and I broke into a cold sweat of panic when I saw them. Like the taller people, these seemed familiar somehow, but unlike the taller people, who walked forward at a stately pace, these smaller creatures scurried near the ground, snuffling and grumbling as if they were tracking something. They seemed dangerous, hostile, and hungry. Then one spotted me watching it and instantly began to crash through the brush towards me. But then a very blonde woman near the lead saw it. She looked me straight in the eye, and her eyes widened as if she was startled to see me. I got the feeling she was communicating mentally with the creature, and she seemed to rein it back, almost with a slender golden cord that I think was there and was attached to the creature's neck. Complaining, the creature turned back from me and rejoined the party. A short distance forward, the party entered another glowing, door-like shape, and gradually they all faded to nothing. I tried many times to see the party again or any trace of the portal, but I never did. The following year, my family moved away, and I never had experience like that again. I don't know what fairies are, but I suspect they inhabit another dimension that overlaps our own from time to time. To clarify, this experience is just one of many in a long line of experiences, but this was one of the first. It happened when I was around 6 or 7. Back then, my grandmother lived in a small house in Massachusetts. She had a separate basement apartment she used to rent out. On the main floor, next to the door to the downstairs apartment, was a set of stairs leading to the second floor. Underneath those stairs was a small nook with this white leather couch. That nook was always an odd place to me. It never felt right. I ran past it most of the time. It makes me think of a liminal place now that I think about it. Not quite here or there. It just seemed forgotten with just enough space for that couch, a small table, and grandmother's typewriter. On the wall over the couch was a puzzle, one that featured an illuminated unicorn in a fantastical woodland setting with a cottage and a circular clearing. That puzzle always caught my attention, but I didn't dwell on it because, like I said, that little nook bothered me, and I didn't like to spend too much time there. On this particular night, I went to sleep in my grandmother's room. The night was very windy. I remember laying down and hearing the spooky sounds of tree branches scraping along the windows in the wind. But as I listened to the howling wind, I began to hear another sound. It was very faint at first, almost impossible to hear over the wind, but still I heard it. It was like a low hum. I strained to listen, and then it steadily became louder, just gradually rising in sound. It sounded like nothing else I'd ever heard before. It was amazing. The most beautiful sound I'd ever heard in my life. It was a voice singing. The singing sounded like something out of a dream. It had a rapturous quality to it, and soon I could hear wind instruments playing along. It left me on edge but spellbound. But then the beautiful music gradually became louder and louder until finally it was intrusive, like it had been trying to attack my ears. The music drowned out all thought and other sounds. I felt overwhelmed, and then I blacked out. When I woke up, I found I wasn't lying in my grandmother's bed anymore. I was lying on that white leather couch in the nook underneath the stairs, below the unicorn puzzle. It was still nighttime, pitch dark, and the couch was freezing. I looked around in a daze. There was silence at first, and then I heard something. It was the low sound of laughter. I became aware that there was a boy standing in the shadows, staring at me. I got up and ran full sprint back upstairs. As I ran, I could hear the boy laughing, like the whole thing was some kind of joke. I told my grandmother what happened, and together we searched the house for an intruder, but found no one. There was no sign the house had been broken into, and no explanation for how I'd ended up on the white couch under the stairs. It happened again a few months later. The same thing. The music, the feeling of being mesmerized and then overwhelmed and blacking out, only to wake up somewhere other than the bed I'd been sleeping in. And then I would sense the boy and hear his laughter. This experience started to happen on a semi-regular basis, the same thing over and over again. I eventually noticed that when this would happen, it would go down around midnight, or close to it. And when I awoke, the clock wouldn't have changed either. It was like time had stopped during these strange encounters with the music and the boy. Over time, I began slowly to communicate with the boy, or he started to communicate with me. The thing is, I wouldn't remember much about our actual meetings, yet each time I felt I knew a little bit more about him. For example, one time I woke up and I knew the boy wanted to be called Gene. I had the sense that I had asked him his name and that at some point he had told me to call him Gene, but I couldn't recall the actual conversation. I later got the sense that I couldn't remember much about our meetings because he didn't want me to. And yet I felt that he was teaching me things during these meetings, telling me about subjects that weren't pertaining to everyday mundane things. The impression I had of him as a person was that he was charming, cultured, but a bit of a jackass. I could tell he felt I ought to be grateful for his attention. He could be cold. I mean that quite literally. Once I got quite irritated with him and talked back, and he grabbed me by my wrist, and I just remember an intense cold sensation. He didn't harm me, but I felt like it was some kind of a warning. After these encounters, I would awake disoriented and with a headache sometimes. There'd be a lack of energy. I think he drained me in some way. I eventually realized that I was sleepwalking or something similar during these meetings. My sister almost caught me sleepwalking once. I was aware of her presence and froze at the bottom of the steps. She eventually went to bed, and I moved on to my meeting with the boy. She hadn't seen me. There were a few times where I tried to tell an adult about what was happening, but neither my cousin nor my grandmother ever believed me. They thought it was all my imagination or that I had been dreaming. I remember on one occasion when I was talking about the experiences with my cousin, Jean appeared. He came upstairs during the day. All I can truthfully remember is blonde hair and an expectant look at the denial of my cousin. Later, Jean told me no one I ever told would believe me, and I felt resigned after that. I'm not sure how long this went on for. I felt a deep connection or thrall with him. Truthfully, I felt kind of like a pet. I could sense him, and I always knew if I had displeased him. But despite this connection I felt, I wanted to be free of these meetings. Gene frightened me more than he drew me in. I tried different things to prevent myself from going to him. I tried tying myself to the bed with my sheets, stuffing cotton in my ears, not sleeping, etc. Then one night I decided to confront him directly. I told him that I may have been human, but I too was strange, and sometimes I felt bigger than I was, and I didn't want to meet with him anymore, and that was that. He was incensed, but I felt something break between us. He gave me a piercing look, and then all I remember is this bright green light and his voice yelling my name in rage. That caused me to run upstairs, and I passed out on the edge of my bed. When I awoke, the desk had been turned over, and paper was everywhere. But he never bothered me again. Soon after, we moved, but I did feel a little depressed after that, having done that to him. I'm not gonna lie, it hurt a bit, but I needed to be free. That experience was my first introduction to the Fae. Years later, after doing a ton of research, I felt almost like an expert on the subject. Much of my research taught me things about those meetings with Jean in retrospect. For example, I learned there's often an erasure of important or identifying info when dealing with the Fae. You can see their faces but won't remember them. They can tell you a name, show you a place, or even reveal themselves, but it won't matter because the details will float away or be inaccurate. The details I remember from my meetings with Jean are like this. I remember vaguely that he was luminescent with blonde hair, piercing eyes, and strange ears, that he was stronger than he seemed, that he was horrifically beautiful in an unnatural way. He really was the epitome of mysterious but personable. He often seemed human in his facade, but then there were these small, sudden moments of cruelty and a lack of empathy that would remind me of his unearthly nature. The fairy music that always seemed to accompany him was similar to Evanescence, sort of, in the feeling it gave me. It was like mystical, airy, beautiful, sad, wind instruments, and something unearthly. It made you yearn for it. Parts of this experience were repeated in later experiences I've had, especially the music part. Hearing them sing and becoming seduced or enthralled, seeing them in dreams or being lured, it fits with most of the folklore and signs I've read concerning them. Most of my knowledge about them growing up was accidental and learned from experiences, but it matched up with the literature I discovered later. I feel a strange connection to them because of all these experiences. Sometimes I feel like they've been watching me all my life. I have missing time, and I've seen them in dreams and in real time. And I have this strange sense that they guard me sometimes and kind of coach me. What are fairies? I liken them to sharks, alien to experience and to look at. They're fantastical, unpredictable, and do not care for personal boundaries. Human morals and laws mean nothing to them. Their outlook is ambiguous, unknowable, and amoral. They can be so beautiful that they cause you to cry, but you should never trust them. They're otherworldly beings, and they exist. I find them fascinating, but I'm just at a loss at why they're interested in me. But I'm really glad the fairy census exists to record these kind of experiences. As much as I act like I hate the fae, I really do love them more than I should. I was about 10 years old, and it was my first year living in rural Pennsylvania. My friends and I were playing in the woods behind her house. We were pretty deep into the forest exploring and playing pretend near a small creek. I'll never forget this. Out of nowhere, we began to hear a woman's melodic voice singing in the woods. It didn't seem to be coming from any one direction, and it was quiet at first, slowly creeping up to this very loud, haunting song, ringing through the trees, filling every inch of the woods. We looked at one another, terrified, and started to run as fast as we could out of the forest and back to her house. The best thing I can think of to compare the music to is the song from The Sleeping Beauty that plays in the background as Maleficent leads Aurora to the spindle. There were no words to the singing we heard. It was a high-pitched melodic sound. It was actually an incredibly beautiful voice, but something about the tone and melody chilled me to the core. I don't know for sure who or what was the source of this voice, but I'm absolutely certain it was not of this world. It was just a high-pitched, beautiful, haunting, and incredibly horrifying female singing voice that rang through the trees and seemed to completely fill the forest. It wasn't words or any kind of language, more like a melody. It's hard to explain. It just felt fey. It's so hard to explain why it was so otherworldly, beautiful but terrifying. It just was. I believe in fairies 100%, but take great care not to offend them. I think some want to help humanity become better caretakers of the earth, while some absolutely hate us, and others are ambivalent. This experience started as a dream, one that seemed to last the whole night. In my dream, a male fairy who was almost human seeming, but not quite, had a little realm in an office building, or maybe a convention center. I know it's weird, but it was a dream, and it seemed normal to me in the moment. This fairy was very beautiful, with dark hair and dark blue eyes. He stood at a bit over 6 feet tall and had an enthralling presence. I was working for him in some way, running errands for him. And this is awful, but the next thing I knew, he wanted me to kill several people who were physically much larger than I was. And in the dream, I did it. I killed some people by stabbing them in the back with a sword. Then I went back to the fairy's office and he welcomed me back and congratulated me on a job well done. Then he had another task for me. He wanted me to capture a friend and bring her to him. This was a friend I knew in waking life, a real person. But still, in the dream, I simply did what he asked. And like in any dream, I had a strange knowledge of what to do. I had a piece of paper and I marked it up with these sigils of some kind and then brought it to my friend. But my friend, upon seeing the sigils, immediately knew that it was related to fairies, and she said she didn't want to be involved. So I went back to the fairy's office and was going to explain the situation to him when I woke up. The thing is, when I awoke, lying in bed, I felt a surreal feeling of being held. I use a weighted blanket, but this specific feeling had never happened before. It felt like there was a real person lying in bed next to me, holding me. And in some way, I knew it was the fairy from my dream. My eyes were still closed, but I was very much awake. I heard unintelligible whispers in my ear, in his voice, the voice of the fairy from my dream. I couldn't tell what words he was saying or whether it was even him causing the whispering. The whispers were low and blended together. At this point, I panicked. Nobody was normally in my room. When I slept, I jumped out of bed and looked around, almost expecting to find someone lying there. That's how real the sensation had been. But I was alone. After I calmed myself, I opened my diary, which I write in every morning, and noticed that one page was covered in a dusting of what looked like glitter. I don't know what happened, but it all felt very real. The dream made it clear that this individual was a fairy, and the waking experience made it clear that I was being held by the same individual. But I don't know why I had this experience, what the dream meant, or was trying to tell me, or why I was visited in such a real and physical way on the other side of the dream. I think fairies are the other side of the coin from humans. They live separately from us, but in the same physical world. They're neither good nor evil. Thanks for watching, and thanks to all those who submitted their stories for this one. Just some quick news. I have a website now dedicated to my writing and a separate newsletter for my writing alone. So there I'll be just talking exclusively about my writing and my writing projects and not about the channel. So if you read The Ghosts of Nothing and would be interested in hearing more about that, please sign up at the Shaken Tree. It's there's going to be a link in the description and on my website, which is cecilywalters.com. The Ghost of Nothing is also an audiobook now, so you can check that out on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon. And if you do, please don't forget to leave me a review. Those are just so incredibly helpful. For all those who signed up for a chance to get a free copy of the audiobook in exchange for a review, thank you so much for volunteering for that. Unfortunately, I only had a limited number of free copies available, so if I didn't write you, I ran out of copies. Sorry about that. And the copies were only available for US and British listeners. I was given them by Amazon, and that's all I was given. So sorry to everybody from the rest of the world. The free copies that I had for the US ran out super, super quickly, but actually, I do still have a few free copies left for British listeners. So if you're in the UK and you would like a free copy of the Ghosts of Nothing audiobook in exchange for leaving a review, please fill out the form linked below. If you have a story to share, you can check out the channel's website at scaryfairygodmother.com, link in the description. It has a spot where you can submit your stories, comments, questions, or suggestions. You can also sign up for the channel's mailing list there, Fairy Lights. So I have two mailing lists now, one that's just going to be about my writing and the other one that's dedicated to the channel. So my writing mailing list is The Shaken Tree, and the channel's mailing list is Fairy Lights. If you're just interested more in my writing, it's probably better to sign up just for the Shaken Tree. If you're interested just in the channel and not my writing, Fairy Lights is for you. And if you're interested in both, sign up for both, because these are just sort of, semi-regular. It's not going to be tons of emails or anything like that, every once in a while kind of thing. So feel free to sign up for both. They're totally free. Extra special thanks to all of my supporters on Patreon and anyone who joined the channel or made a one-time donation through PayPal or Coffee. I really appreciate you guys so, so much and the support you are giving this work. If you'd like to support this content, you can check out my Patreon page and the other support options in the description below. You can also sign up to be a paid subscriber of either Fairy Lights or The Shaken Tree. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so thanks to everyone who submitted. The stories were edited for dramatic and narration reasons. To read the Census stories, follow the link in the description. Please leave a comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. It really helps the channel when you do that. And hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.